this. Just realized.
Yep, I can record it, no problem. It's recording.
Wonderful, thank you.
One less thing you have to take care of, JY. So.
Wonderful. So just a few words of introduction before we move to our workshop organizers here. We have so many people joining us. This is wonderful. So this event is funded by the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation Central New York Humanities Corridor Working Group on cultures and languages across the curriculum. If we could go to the next slide. And just to show you, we do have some international attendees where Central New York is located. It's in that red, tiny red circle in the United States, Northeast United States, in the middle of New York State. There is more to New York State above us, actually, so that's why we're Central New York. There's North Country above us, but we are quite close to Canada as well. And if we could go to the next slide. Thank you. In the Central New York Humanities Corridor, there are 11 institutions represented, and these institutions are listed here. These institutions form working groups around various issues. If we could go to the next slide. And this current working group, oh, the formatting has gone a bit awry here, but this current working group is composed of 4 institutions. So if my colleague Corey is here.
Yes, I'm Corey. I'm the director of the Language Center at Colgate University, where we have cultures and languages across the curriculum program. It's probably smaller than a lot of others, but we're working on it.
And our colleague Lisa.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much. Delighted to be here. I'm Lisa. I coordinate our language learning initiatives.
Help them experience that none of the rest of them have. By the time they're senior.
I coordinate language learning initiatives at Cornell, and this includes our languages across the curriculum program and Jumpstart classes. In the language across the curriculum program, I work with faculty and graduate students across the university to set up sections of their classes in languages other than English. We're up to 14 languages. We've just added Korean. The Jumpstart program supports faculty and students who are going on short-term study abroad trips. And those are all 1-credit classes.
Thank you, Lisa. And do we have Oscar?
Hi, everyone. I'm glad to see so much interest in the workshop. So I am an assistant professor of Spanish at Skidmore College. I am at Skidmore College, the CLAC or the LAC program, as we call it, is run by the World Languages Department. So many of my colleagues are present here today, and we are excited to get started.
Thank you so much. And my name is Amanda Brown. I am an associate professor of linguistics at Syracuse University. We are newcomers to this field, and we've really been supported by the National US CLAC Consortium. We are currently and have been operating for the last couple of years CLAC pilots in architecture, history, and linguistics. So the 4 institutions here have a working group working on these issues, and we are so delighted to have today our senior members of the National CLAC Consortium, leaders in this area. So we have JY Jo. She is the Director and Senior International Officer in the Office of Global Engagement at Stockton University. She's the interim chair of the CLAC Consortium in the United States. And secondly, we have Bernd Esterbrook. He is Professor of Global Studies in German at Illinois College, and he is the interim vice chair of the National CLAC Consortium. And then third, we have William Pavlovich. He is the director of the Global Learning Initiatives at Bingham University, and he serves as the secretary and treasurer of the National CLAC Consortium. So these individuals really have put together the 2 workshops that we have today and on Tuesday at the same time. And that, without further ado, let's pass it on to our workshop organizers. Thank you so much.
Hey everyone, yes, thank you for joining us today. We are really excited to have you here, and we look forward to have a wonderful discussions on the CLAC in the next 2 hours. So we just briefly introduce. I want to go a little bit about some logistics. The first one, please be patient with technology, that internet, everything. If we have some tech issues, we'll try to fix it. Everyone should be on mute, but if you have any questions throughout this 2 hours, just raise your hand at the bottom of your page, the Zoom page. You can see raise your hand, or you can just type it in the chat. Please use the chat function, ask questions or share any resources. And it's a workshop, so be prepared that we might have some discussions, and we'll have a breakout rooms discussions. I know that everyone get this fatigue with Zooms. And I sent everyone the workshop manual 2 hours before this workshop. And I tried to mention that we created this one as a draft for the workshop, and we will keep adding resources to this manual and for this today and the next Tuesday, and it will be a collective creation of all the participants. So if you see anything you want to see, anything you think that you are interested in knowing more, and just put it in the chat. And so eventually we look forward to create this manual together. And as you all see, that it will be recorded, and we will share that with the manual and resources later. Here are our today's agenda. We will have a quick intro from 3 of us with different perspectives, and then we'll have a quick talk about the challenges we're all facing, and what is a CLAC, the different CLAC cases we're going to present, and then we'll have discussions on the CLAC ideas and thoughts. Before that, I want to go with quick 2 polls. And the first one you should see is here. Let me bring this one, launch. This one, you can see that on your screen. It asks, what is your role? What is your responsibilities? And it is multiple choices. You can choose both or 3 more. We are still receiving the responses. All right, it looks, that's it. Let me try to launch this. The answers are still coming in. Okay. All right, let's end this and share results. You can see that on your screen. We have over half of our today's participants are faculty in the language programs. Wonderful. And then we have 25% from the education abroad, and then 20% from the international student and service scholar services. And then we'll have 16%, well, not really, but 16% of our participants are the dean pros or the other administrators. And then we have 11% focusing on the comprehensive internationalization, 10% from the teaching and learning center, and 2% from the other organizations not in the higher education institution. All right, let me run the second one. It's also a really quick one. Stop sharing and let me run the second one. In the second one is a really quick question would be, are you familiar with CLAC? All right, let's go with this one. So you can see that 22% are running a program. So glad that you are here joining us today. So we look forward to hearing your experiences. And 40%, a little bit familiar with that. And then almost 40% are not never heard about that. All right, let's, so this is our mapping the room. And now let's go to our introductions.
All right. So I'm Baron Estabrook, and again, I'm a professor at a small liberal arts college in Illinois. And I see myself as a professor of the humanities. I teach language, but I do a lot of other courses. In fact, less language these days than I used to. And one of the things that you might be asking, well, so what am I doing in CLAC? And CLAC is fairly recent for me. I've been involved for about 7 years, but I've gotten very involved. And one of the things that I wanted to talk about, and one of the reasons I'm here today and helping with the workshop, is we have an interesting and unique perspective of certainness right now because of what we've all been through, the pandemic. You know, our normal cycles were interrupted and altered and reshaped to conform to temporary measures. And of course, obviously our task as we hopefully start to come out of this unusual situation here is to recover what's worthwhile in that process. And then also to retain the creative and innovative insights that we gain. There were things we were forced to do, things that we imagined that we decided we wanted to try, and some of them worked, some of them didn't. But again, that's part of our process, is looking both at what we want to make sure we didn't lose and what we want to retain from this experience. And I have found that CLAC is a perfect way to meet both of those different goals. In fact, from my own personal viewpoint here, I'm especially concerned about the humanities. The national decline in the humanities is a source of great concern for a lot of us. And I'm finding that CLAC is one way that I can do something constructive to go and work against that trend. And because CLAC stresses a principle that's true to the entire liberal arts, that all branches of knowledge are connected with and dependent upon one another. And so that's where I'm coming from in this, and one of the reasons why I'm committed to CLAC in the classroom and at my institution.
All right, so my perspective, I work in the in the Office of Global Engagement. So I'm doing all those internationalization, international students, study abroad part. I'm also teaching a course on the understanding of global learning. So every semester, at the end of the semester, right, as this is our last week. So I ask my students to come up with a proposal to develop global learning at Stockton. And usually I will get a lot of students say, we should make language as a requirement at Stockton. And I got really excited, said, well, yeah, let's do that. But then I asked them, how many of you took language courses? None of them. So I always get really frustrated at the end of each semester when I really read through their proposals. They will do study abroad and do all those international programs, and language should be part of that, but actually they don't really engage with language in all those global learning experiences. So that's why I really want to, from my perspective, to see that how we can integrate language and culture into the curriculum, into all different kind of international programs, to make it as part of their experience. Because currently it seems that, at least for my campus, we don't have that kind of experience. And with that, and especially last year, everyone see that with all those, the travel suspensions, with the rise of these interest in the virtual exchanges, with DEI and social justice, we have to, for the professionals in the international education, we need to redesign our students' global learning experience. And hopefully we will discuss more for today.
Hello, everyone. I'm William Bilipavlovich. I'm a Director of Global Learning Initiatives, and that encompasses 2 CLAC programs here at Binghamton University. I am also a sociocultural anthropologist. As a director of CLAC programs, which are in the midst of restructuring, I've seen how a myriad of post-COVID-19 consequences have further exposed already existing issues in higher education, such as enrollment decline and demographic change, budget cuts, institutional and departmental divisions and challenges to collaboration, and the sluggishness of bureaucracy, which we probably are all well familiar with. However, CLAC programs and approaches can respond to and mitigate or ameliorate these challenges in novel ways. And what brought me to CLAC as an anthropologist, I really valued the applied approach that CLAC offers. In many ways, there's a nice overlap with how anthropologists not just study, but do anthropology, and not just in research, but in teaching as well. It has to be applied. It has to be connected to the full spectrum of human existence. So whatever we do, you know, we can approach it, and CLAC really embodies that, particularly with language and culture. It's very holistic, and that's why I love these programs, because they are they can be adapted in so many different ways, and they really can be used. And we're going to touch upon that in our workshops today and next Tuesday, how they can be applied to suit different needs and to respond to different challenges. So thank you.
So to get a little bit more specific about what we've been talking about here, I mean, I'm looking at this from the perspective of, you know, the humanities have suffered some real hits. I think most of us know about this. Bill mentioned the budget cuts, the curricular demotions that's happened to a lot of institutions, declining enrollment, and all the rest of it here. And this leads to an assumption that a lot of people make. The humanities are on their way out, right? Popular majors don't need what the humanities have to offer, because the humanities are a luxury or an add-on. And then, of course, we've seen in the last few years some tendencies toward isolationism that openly denigrate the acquisition of knowledge and experience beyond our borders, right? I have a fair number of students who ask the question, why do we need a second language when English is universal as they see it? And then, of course, there's the instrumentalization of much of the curriculum, where the how becomes more important than the why, and where what we do in the humanities is viewed as a kind of navel gazing. And of course, we have our admissions officers who are interested in enrollment and getting people on campus. And they insist that the students that we're looking at want jobs, not ideas. And lastly, we have things on campus, like on our campus, a language requirement. Some of you have that as well, I'm sure, where the authority of this tradition that has been there for a long time is now under serious question, where a lot of people, whether we're talking about administrators or parents or students themselves, are asking us to justify the expense and inconvenience of language learning. So when we look at all these things, to the next slide, please, there are some things we can do against this, and some ways we can approach this to make it clear to people that what we're doing is in fact intensely relevant. Now, you know, the international versus the national, I think the pandemic has been instructive in this regard in lots of ways. Biology doesn't respect borders, right? And of course, globalization is an interesting term. And I think just the arguments about how good globalization is and the effects that it has on society across the spectrum of different aspects of society here is really important. The economic interdependence, I think, has become more visible in some respects to an awful lot of people, precisely because of the pandemic. And of course, climate change becomes increasingly a more important issue, controversial in various ways, but it too does not respect borders. And of course, when we talk about politics and values generally in the world, war, conflict, and being able to negotiate, these are all things that the humanities obviously play an important role in. And so one of the things that's very practical on our campus is, again, helping students deal with rational discourse and belief, and navigating those two, which they feel very strongly. And of course, learning to live with the questions rather than insisting upon the answers. Some of the humanities does exceptionally well. But this need to negotiate with ambiguity, indeterminacy, uncertainty, and diversity is something that we find less tolerance for, I think, these days among an awful lot of students than we used to. And lastly, one very important one is what I would call technology education. We have given our young people an extraordinary amount of technology, which, if you've been teaching for the last 20 years, has transformed many aspects of the educational environment here. But I'm not sure how much clear reflection we've done in regard to that. And a lot of the discourse at our institutions is focused on quantity rather than quality, and restoring some balance there is something that the humanities can do. And so I think the next slide here, I believe. So that's just a kind of an outline of some of the problems that I think can be dealt with here through CLAC, and that CLAC is helping us address.
Thanks, Barrington. You've outlined a lot there that touch upon the whole world and everything. And continuing on that, other challenges, as I briefly mentioned before, that we're all facing in different ways. And I'm sure, and we have a few guests here from other parts of the world. And maybe at one point in the breakout rooms, I'd like to hear your takes on and your perspectives on this particular challenge, such as enrollment and budget. I just pulled recent articles because this is something which is on the mind of many, an administrator, a dean, a provost, president of a college or a university, and faculty all across the United States, and dare I say, North America. And that is referring to enrollment and how there is a trend, and it's forecasted for enrollment to decline. And that is tied to a lot of things, but the recent trend of lower enrollments can be attributed to a complex mixture of shifting demographics, fewer high school graduates, declining birth rates, and increasing costs of education. According to a recent report from the Western Interstate Commission for Higher Education, or WISH, after 2025, there will be fewer prospective high school graduates, the result of a decline in birth rates during and after the Great Recession. And that's referencing the great economic sort of collapse or hit that the world faced in 2008, 2009, and we have lingering effects. When we consider how current and lingering economic, political, and social instability can factor in, college enrollment growth does not appear to be particularly promising over the next several years. And this was all before COVID-19. So this COVID-19 and the global responses to it has really brought to the fore and exacerbated these already existing problems. And you see here a couple of these headlines, the looming higher education enrollment cliff, right? Referring to how enrollment will drop off. And this one just was published a month and a half ago, that spring enrollment keeps slipping. And NPR, fewer students are going to college, and here's why this matters. And then in terms of the bottom line, or dollars and cents, or pounds and shillings, how much has COVID cost colleges? Well, they forecasted that as being $183 billion. Binghamton University is part of the State University of New York, and the SUNY system, as it's referred to, has lost over $15 billion. And every single local institution, such as Binghamton, has had to take a huge budget cut. And we were already facing, especially as Bernd mentioned, with the humanities, already difficult situations, and this has made it more difficult. However, all is not bleak. It's still too early to count the final cost to higher ed. It's safe to say that the cost will be high, but yet there is still a glimmer of hope. There's still a silver lining there, and we will talk about how with CLAC and through CLAC, we really can address this, as opposed to just sticking our heads in the sand and hoping that things will go away or get better magically, but we can actually be proactive and do things despite or in spite of these challenges. Thanks, Jaywon.
Yeah, I would go quickly with the international education. As you can see on the screen that here, this is a model, comprehensive internationalization model from the American Council on Education. And one of this is the curriculum. co-curriculum and learning outcomes. And in that, it explicitly mentioned language requirement. So language is always part of internationalization, but it's not visible or it's not integrated into the internationalization part, the activities or programs. And the very recent report says that 46% of institutions reported they have a foreign language requirement for the undergrads. And we are actually, they're just opening up the next round report survey, and the next mapping the curriculum report should come next year. And let's see how the language is playing the role in this. But it is still very, it's not active as we should be. So that's why I think that it's for the international education, we all see that language and study abroad, everything language plays a very important role in this, and how can we make it more visible and get into this general education, the curriculum. And on this side, you can see that we are doing last year, we're doing a lot of virtual part, the virtual study abroad, virtual exchange, and with a lot of concentration on the engaging with the local and the global communities. And a lot of discussions and programs are designed to meet the UN SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. And when we are planning those programs, and especially when we are talking about the post-COVID, what are those, how the technology play a role in this? I think language would find a way that we can sustain this virtual exchange or the virtual part of others. So it's adding more to our current international education programs. And another part we also want to mention would be how many of our education abroad programs actually focus or have components in language learning. Do we work with the language programs when we are designing our education abroad programs? How many international students on your campus would find a meaningful way to contribute to their courses? Rather than just seeing them as just bringing the financial benefits to the institution, they are bringing those linguistic and cultural backgrounds, and how can we use that and make it more visible on campus? How can we support faculty in internationalizing the curriculum? How can we find the collaborations with the disciplinary courses and the language courses? And how to sustain the virtual exchange. And this is a big discussion. And as I put here, the Forum on Education Abroad, this is a program, it's ongoing program, is investigating the careers of language study abroad alumni. So the virtual internship, that's another trend, is going up. And how should language play a role in this? So it's a time for us to consider when we are designing those programs, what's the role and how we can prepare students to better meet others' needs. Another thing is that what we are doing is how we can align what we are doing for different kind of programs with the institutional missions and priorities. I here put one example as a DEI and social justice. We need to recognize the diversity on campus, the linguistic, the cultural diversity on campus. The education abroad, we have a lot of discussions, right? How we can bring those underrepresented population in this program. Another quick one, just on international students, a lot of institutions, they just quickly announced that they would require students to have vaccines for the fall 2021, but then they did not realize international students is a different group. They are overseas, many of them are overseas, and they probably took other vaccines not really being approved by the FDA in the US, and when they come here, how should we deal with that? So that's a example showing that the diversity or the DEI thinks that our international students are not considered in this this big decision when they require students to take the vaccine. I just recently read another pilot study, and they invited a group of minority students to ask them what do they think about DEI and study abroad. And those minority students said that, I think DEI is supporting us, is advocating for us, is doing that. But for study abroad, they see this as a fix, as a way to fix them, or as an actual. So think about what the message that we send to our students when we are talking about education abroad. So I think this is another big part that we need to work on.
And I would like to add to that in terms of diversity, there are further nuances in terms of how we identify and recognize diversity. And some of them JY has just pointed out. But if we recognize the full diversity of diversity, the full spectrum, I should say, for example, national origin, ethnicity, racial diversity, but also socioeconomic background, religious background, political affiliation, regional area, you know, if you're coming from a rural or an urban area, experiential, your life experiences and who you are as a person. For example, also first generation students who go to college, right? They have a different experience. They're coming with a whole different set of registers and of understandings and of goals as well that equip them. So all of these students, you know, they represent our student body, right? And we should recognize that as something that, you know, we can, you know, accommodate, and in terms of at least just to identify here, this is what they have, and in terms of pedagogical approaches, it's very, very important, but it's something not to forget. It's very important.
Yes, so with that, we can see that the cultures and languages across the curriculum is an approach that we try to address all those issues that we see from our different perspectives. So I want to give you really, this is in a nutshell, really quick one, is that we're going to explain more about the different models, different ways of doing that. Here are the several really important principles. The first one is a meaningful use of a language. So it's not that will be when they are study abroad, when they are taking courses in anthropology, how can we help students, support students to use the language that they are learning? So meaningful use of that. And then we also would want to emphasize is that to the by or,
The regular is a bit different. What? Only pay for what you.
Sorry, I tried to find. Let me mute everyone.
Business growing as you swap. You need to hire.
Okay. Sorry about that. And the bi or multilingual and intercultural insights and interculturally nuanced understanding of the content. And the last part is in any curriculum and actual curriculum context. So the language should go out of just the language programs, right? Getting to all those different programs on campus. A quick history of the CLAC, because many of you mentioned that you were not really quite familiar or never heard about the CLAC, is that it is connected with, for the past decades, it's growing with those across the curriculum efforts, right? Those applied learning. And we can put in our manual that 1998, I remember, it's Steve Strait, Dr. Steve Strait from Binghamton, and he wrote an article about the languages across the curriculum, and we can put it in the chat later. You can check it. It's, even though it's 20 plus years old, but you can see many of those things we talk in that article are still meaningful to the current context. All right.
I would say one thing here that perhaps might be useful in this regard, and that is that this meaningful use here is actually one of the ways in which language, there are a lot of language teachers here today, for example, and sometimes I think CLAC has been misinterpreted as some kind of threat to language learning and so forth, but the meaningful use is an opportunity for some really creative partnerships, because again, getting students to learn the basics of the language, to learn vocabulary, grammar, and the rest of it. And then, but quite often they're not always the opportunities for them to really apply it. And CLAC is a wonderful chance for them to go ahead and to apply it in creative ways. And in fact, I think for a lot of us in the languages, especially those like German, which are rather endangered these days, finding opportunities where we can go ahead and make meaningful use here is a great way to argue with those administrators who want to get rid of you. It's a way of clinging to life, you might say, and exploring how to really use this there. And so I think that's a really important part of the baseline of CLAC.
And on the slides, you can see, actually, we put it in the manual, so probably don't really spend a lot of time on this one, is that I think right before the pandemic, a group of the CLAC practitioners from all the CLAC institutions, and we had a meeting at the University of Chicago. And in those 2 days, conference meeting, and we all discussed what CLAC is actually. So this is something that we all try to propose, is that it's this multilingual and multicultural perspectives will inform all curricular and co-curricular practices in higher education. And so the barriers between the language and the disciplines should disappear, right? We should merge, we should connect those things together. And all students should have the opportunities to use the language they learned or they are interested in learning. And the institutions should value language as a means to approach, to access, to generate, and to share knowledge. So with that, so that's our CLAC consortium. We're doing today this workshop, and we are working with a group of our institutions. You can see here, these are our current institution in the US, and we are welcoming one that University of Pittsburgh just joined us very recently. And thank you to one of yes, I see you, our Dr. Yes, here, Deb Resinger from Duke University for introducing the CLAC to the other institutions. All right, so as Bernd mentioned a little bit here, but we want to spend some time really talking about the CLAC and traditional language courses. And especially when we are designing this. And I can see that some of the language professors, they might have a question about even the first one is to incorporate this intercultural language use outside of the traditional language classroom setting. So it's not a competition to that, but it's expanding the language use outside of the traditional language classroom. It's not replace that, but it's something that we are expanding, and we want to, so those, when we are talking about study abroad, when we are talking about all those disciplinary courses, how can we build that in? And it's also flexible because we will design those CLAC programs based on the students' language proficiency levels. So that's another part. The fully fluent in the target language is not necessarily mandatory for the CLAC initiatives. And then we also want to emphasize that we want students to continue learning the language. So the goal, or maybe one of the outcomes of the CLAC programs, is that students will continue learning the language. They grow interest in the language, in the culture, and they will keep learning that. So it's actually bringing more students to the language programs, is to integrate the use of language across and throughout the students' experience. Bernd and Bill, do you want to add something here?
Yeah, I would say here that, again, one of the things about this, I think, is that this has helped me make certain kind of transitions that have been really important for my discipline in German, and broadening and getting involved with other disciplines, precisely because I used to have this mindset, I think, that I had to teach students X amount of semesters or years of German before they could do anything. And what I found is that CLAC has allowed me to explore some really interesting ways of doing things with the language from a very early period on. And what I found is that I can, in fact, in a strange way, can expect more of students than I ever did before. And there's a great deal of creativity. There's a lot of potential for using the language, which in previous years, decades ago, I just didn't really think about in the same way. And so it's moved me to some extent from my comfort zone. But what it has done, the most effective thing about it, I think, is that I have more students who, having met the requirement, and of course, that's the issue of language requirements is a tough one. We have it because most students and many of our institutions don't want to take language. But when we do so, we encourage a belief that they've got to simply fulfill the requirement and then they're done. And what CLAC does is say, no, far from it, that rather than this is a terminus, an ending point, instead you can use this language to do some amazing things in the other disciplines. If they're a language major, that's one thing, but they're not. They realize they can use this in a very practical way. And that has gotten them excited. And I would also say it's broadened contacts with other faculty that I think have really been important. It's helped move our institution towards a much more interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary environment where we are talking across disciplinary boundaries in various ways and exploring potentials and possibilities there. And it's exciting intellectually as well as practically speaking for the curriculum.
And that's a very important point. I'd like to just add to that. First, it entails lots of creativity, but also that practical aspect. It needs to be not just pragmatic, but it needs to be applied. And that's the beauty and the value, the inherent value with this wonderful program, because it can be applied in so many different ways, in ways that make sense for that particular either course, faculty member, or the student body that are taking that course, or the subject matter. So you apply it in ways that can be best used, that are most suitable for what your intended objectives are. And we had a comment in the chat in terms of how do we, sort of get monolingual faculty on board. Well, again, it's through the creativity. And there's not one way that language can be applied or infused or used even. There's so many different ways. And that's why it's not this, one size fits all approach, this cookie cutter, this prefabricated mold that we have to use in the same way at all at the same times. It really, it's an individualized, tailored approach. It just needs, again, like as Bernd said, creativity and some kind of vision. But ultimately, if anyone has any interest, they will find a way to make it work. And it need not be complex nor complicated, right? It's quite simple in the end, the formula. But yeah, we'll get into that more. Thanks.
Yeah, many of you probably saw this before, but this one is, I think that's really, that kind of summarize the CLAC and the language, traditional language classrooms. So it's a language-based content learning. So when we students are doing the other programs, and we use language as an approach to develop the intercultural competence. So that's, I think, the very important part when we are thinking about the CLAC and traditional language learning. All right, I think here. Let me move to the next one. So I'm thinking that we talk a little bit, well, more than we planned for this one, but I think that it's very important for us to have a quick idea about what CLAC is. And in the workshop manual, we put the CLAC manifesto. For some of you probably read this before, but if you don't, here's a link. We can put it in the link here, this. And I want you to, let me stop sharing. Sorry, my screen is a little bit with others part. So please go to, let me put this link in the chat. And if you can see that in our manual, or if you can find it from the chat, and click on this link, and you can see that here is the manifesto. It has developed for a while, but you can see that some of those things are still quite relevant and it's still really timely for us. So let's have a quick breakout room discussion, and what we expect you to quickly browse through the bullets on those CLAC manifesto. Let me let's here. You see.
And JY, we'll stay out of those breakout rooms, correct?
Yeah, let me bring you here. You can see that here will be that it's not. And I hope that this will help you to understand more about what the CLAC. And so let's have a quick discussion that you read through this and to see that what are the things that what you found you will agree, what are the things that you will still have a question for this part. All right, let's have a quick breakout room. I'll just randomly put you in the breakout rooms. And if you read this before, that's wonderful. If not, you can take this time to discuss what do you think. But by now, what do you think of a CLAC? What kind of questions you have? On your screen, you should have see the message pops and you can go to the rooms. You should see a message popping on your screen, so you can just click it and join that room. Now it's 1:45. Let's give 5 minutes. Do you think that's too short, or?
It might be a little short, but. I'll be right back.
Do you want to quick pause recording?
Yes. I will do it. Thank you.
Before we move on to the quick models for the CLAC, anyone want to share? What do you think, or what do you, if you have any burning questions, or what do you have discussed?
May I?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I was going through the document, and there was a point about how is the sensitization to cultural differences can be carried out, and I was a little. And then there was this talk about the third space, where you know, it's a point of estrangement, where you know, people are given more opportunities to understand other cultures and so on. But I was a little concerned about this point of estrangement, because if proper sensitization is not carried out, then it can lead to something very negative as well, in terms of creating myths about cultures. And so what are the strategies which are used to create this sensitization, because it's a very critical issue. So I would like to know more about that.
Well, I'd like to jump in at first as a sociocultural anthropologist. So there's a strategy that anthropologists have used in terms of making the strange familiar and the familiar strange as well, to be aware of one's own culture in terms of how it's constructed, all the things that, you know, that go into making things as they are, because things didn't just, you know, fall from the sky and we do things this way just because, right? There's a reason for it, and there's a reason why there's difference in the world, and in terms of, you know, behaviors and styles and down the line. And so to bring that, as you say, that sensitization, right, that awareness, you know, you first need to recognize in terms of that there is diversity and how that came to be and why that exists. And it's not, you know, inherently value judgment there, right? We're not about putting one side or one practice or one culture or one behavior as better or more important than another. We definitely wouldn't do that. But in terms of bringing out into the open that everyone needs to be aware, not just of difference, but in terms of your own personal culture, individual, local, regional culture, and cultures that you embody and exhibit and express, and as well as yes, so those differences that that we need to recognize, our own and others as well. So and that can be done different ways, pedagogically and practically as well. But that estrangement is not in terms of to alienate, but in terms of to estrange oneself from one's own culture, in order so you can objectively create that distance that you can recognize. Aha, I identify with, I am a member of a culture or several cultures. So it's more of identification, and it's more of a philosophical, intellectual process of recognizing that.
Yeah, well, thank you. So if I understand correctly, it's about creating an alternative point of view rather than estranging in that connotative way where identification is lost. So it's a multi-perspectivization, right?
It's creating the space to allow for that, for that reception. Yes.
Right.
I think, yeah. Oh, okay. We have a question. Yes, Javier.
Hi, yes, I just wanted to comment on the last point that, we're talking about. I think maybe a better word would be unfamiliar instead of estrangement. I do agree with William with everything that he said. Something that I wrestle with sometimes is that we try to teach in different cultures, but we always try to teach different cultures in English. And part of the unfamiliar experience that students need to get so that they actually acknowledge that we are all different in many ways, which is something actually positive, it gets lost, and right, because we are always teaching in English, we are teaching cultures in English, and we don't seem to find a way. I have not found a way to teach different cultures in different languages in one same course or one same classroom. So that is the difficulty for me. But anyway, thank you.
I think that's a perfect segue to move to the our next one will be, we'll talk briefly about our models. And I think that, so we're talking about how we want to do that. So I think that what really designing a program is very important for us to make sure that we will get the expected outcomes that we want students to get. Before we move to the models, I just want to give you that it is approach. Think that as a goal, not just a structure. And so we're going to share with you several different models that different campuses are using, but it's very complicated. But the important message is that you need to customize that to meet the needs of your campus, the program you have, the students you have, the learning outcomes you expect to get. So I try to group that into 3 different groups, from a more really more formal way to a kind of less in a formal in the way. So the first group is more would be that from the very first, the part would be a dual degree, right? Students taking courses in the language and the courses in the disciplinary courses, and then get dual degree in this. And then immersion would be that not particularly or articulate in that way, but still would be students, they are taking courses complete taught by in a target language, or if they are doing the study abroad programs, right? Even though they are in anthropology, but they can take, when they are studying abroad in Colombia, so they can take the language courses in that way. Internship abroad. And the linked is another way, would be kind of team taught, right? One faculty from a language program, one faculty from a disciplinary field. And so they were connected and was offering 1 credit or offering credit bearing courses in the language programs. Do you want to add, Bernd and Bill, do you want to add something here?
I would just say that when I was first encountered these models, I remember thinking, wow, I don't know if any of these exactly work. And then I began to realize that I was utilizing, and at our institution, we're utilizing several of these models in different ways. And also I would say too, that it's not a matter of adopting a model for the entire institution. There's some schools here that have done that. They've really made a CLAC program as a major part of the curriculum. And there are other situations where individual faculty have, as I have done in my institution, and several members of my department have done, they've created this from, so to speak, the bottom up and utilized these ideas. So again, it's just a way to start thinking about this process.
Yeah, we did not put a model on that one because it's kind of like practices are different. It's not really this one. And the second group would be more most common way that would be starting from the disciplinary course. So it's the initiated, usually something that would be, we have a course that in the content area, and then we'll have a trailer course, right, attached to that, the content course, or we have a discussion session in that. So we put here as two different kind of practices or models, but one would be some with a credit, some would not with a credit, and you will hear more, especially for the infused model would be for the Binghamton, and you're going to hear more about what they are doing. And so that will be from the disciplinary courses. And the last group we put here is a very more creative or empowered or independent study, that even though that's for the research project, they can grow from that, or that for a course in, say, criminal justice, but a group of one students that is fluent in Arabic, and she can propose or to do a research project in Arabic. So this is another thing, was be more independent or more flexible in a way. As I mentioned that, or as we all really try to emphasize, it is not a really rigid structure that people are doing that in this way. It's that here are different ways, different practices of how you do that. And think about the campus and try to find out, maybe you will not do one, maybe you will do something between.
Right.
You're not doing that, but this way you will something between. You will create a one course with 0 or with a half credit, not one credit, not 0 credit, or something like that. Bill,
Right. These are more conceptual models, right? These aren't, again, molds that have to be, set in stone. Of course, you apply it whichever way is best for you, and whether that means merging some elements, right, to look something different or making some kind of hybrid, but absolutely. Right.
And in the workshop manual, we have these are all summarized, actually a little bit greater length there in there too. So if you want to look at this later.
Yeah.
Okay, and so when we create different modes of application, different models, different ways of actually applying a CLAC approach or a CLAC program, one of the things that we need to keep an eye on and to be cognizant of is how do we assess this, right? What's the goal, and how do we measure this? Well, first and foremost, any meaningful use of language, it necessitates meaningful assessment. But how can we measure? There's a problem here, right, in terms of something that needs to be addressed. How do we actually measure individual learning and dynamic engagement that crosses, that intersects, that cross-cuts traditional boundaries? And there are different types of boundaries, within disciplines or linguistic or ethnic or experiential, or as well as political, and which is inherently personal, because who's the referent here in terms of meaningful? Who's the arbiter? Who decides what's meaningful? Well, it shouldn't be just an administrator or the faculty member. It's nice for them to recognize, but ultimately, who determines if it was meaningful? It's the participant and it's the student, right? They determine whether or not this program has been meaningful through their participation and their language usage with that. And that is a key part. Next slide, please. And so that meaningful assessment, it has to reference the individual participant. So it's meaningful self-evaluation. So CLAC participants, anyone who actually is part of this program, who goes through whether it's an official model or whatever type of mode of participation that CLAC offers, the participants have to identify if and how their experience was valuable. And I was going through, so at Binghamton University, and which I'll get into a little bit later, we've had a very long-standing and successful program. And I was just with our program assistant going over 10 years worth of surveys. And we found some common responses, which I thought were applicable and which were representative of the different ways that students have found such participation valuable, how they have self-identified and self-assessed. And so the first one is students said it increased my knowledge of discipline-specific subject matter. And this ties to domain knowledge, because we have had our CLAC program called LXC, Languages Across the Curriculum, tied to or connected to particular courses which are being offered, already existing courses. And so it helped to enhance that knowledge. So for example, of engineering or of computer science or philosophy. The next one is students say, it gave me insight on how culture shapes knowledge and perspective. So now this is touching upon the intercultural awareness and cross-cultural understanding, which is important because we can never separate language from culture. They always have to be in tandem, never in a vacuum. The third one, students have said that participation in LXC or in CLAC programs, how it inspired them to continue language study more formally. So again, earlier there was some misunderstanding amongst some language faculty thinking that CLAC programs would sort of be in competition with. Well, no, it's working hand in hand and through a different approach in terms of taking language beyond the language classroom and applying it in different ways. So actually, many language departments and practitioners have come around and they wholeheartedly embrace this. And how could they not, right? Because it can lead to greater participation. We have had many students, and our surveys have shown, after participating in LXC, they wanted to use that language more, and then they, enrolled in courses for, for Spanish or for French or for any other language that they found useful. So it's pointing to more formalized language learning and usage. The fourth one, participation in LXC helped me to do research using a non-English language. And now this is touching upon how we internationalize the curriculum, how we globalize it, how we infuse it with not just multilingual research, but also cross-cultural perspectives, which is absolutely crucial. And finally, the last point here, help me to find and question assumptions in text. This is so useful, not just assumptions embedded or inherent to a particular linguistic structure or cultural perspective, but in terms of how this touches upon critical thinking, the tools, the approaches in terms of how do we understand how language is used, how it's connected to and used in particular ways in different contexts for different subject matters, et cetera, et cetera. But it really necessitates that critical approach to understand the words and the context and the meaning and the agenda with that. So this is something that students can use, not just in their multilingual language use, but within their regular monolingual language use as well. And so these are all key areas that CLAC can address, that CLAC makes use of in our programs.
Bill, I would just say add here that the third bullet point really hits very hard here for me because it turns the tables in a certain sense. I'm used to telling students how well they've done in their language and where they are deficient and where they need to work harder. And when you have students who come to you who have done this self-evaluation as a result of the practical interactions with the culture and language, and who are now not only able to sort of self-diagnose and recognize what needs to be done, but are highly motivated to go and do it, they want now to go ahead and improve their vocabulary. They want to improve their knowledge of grammar and syntax and the rest of it here. That's that's a really encouraging thing. We get a lot of passive resistance from students who are, again, with language requirements, are taking the language to fulfill the requirement. And then with these kinds of programs, one thing that CLAC does is it really shifts that, and it allows a student to look and see the utility of what the language can do for them.
Absolutely.
And to recognize that they are doing it at a very basic level, and then have them wanting more. And once they want more, that, of course, I think we all understand how that works in the classroom. When they really want more and they're self-motivated, then suddenly the language classroom becomes a very different place.
I see a hand raised. Yes.
I had a quick comment. Instead of using words like assessment and evaluation, we tend to use words like, progress indicator, which tends to make it more relevant, or actually incorporating exactly what both of you have commented on.
But when you said, thanks for the comment, when you said we, what are you referring to?
I'm sorry, I'm at UCLA, and I'm a faculty director of a unit on excellence in pedagogy and innovative classrooms. Okay. And that's why, and we're a large university, and I'm trying to move away from students being focused on grades, and faculty that interact with students and are trying to incorporate language across the curriculum. I don't want them to fixate on the assessment or grades part of it. And exactly what you mentioned, that it has to be participant based, the student's viewpoint, or what did they get out of the course shouldn't come from the faculty, but should come from the students. So I started promoting phrases like self-progress indicators, and we set it up similar to like can-do statements from ACTFL. And then, so we set up, what are you able to do with the program of study that you have undertaken?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Great point. And thanks for bringing that up. And these, evaluations and assessment, they don't necessarily have to be tied to grades per se. Again, this is in terms of, you're appraising, right? You're reviewing your experience with that. So, I mean, we can use different terms for it, but it's ultimately and essentially the same thing, right? Absolutely. Excellent point.
But I think another important part is that we're talking about students' language learning or language using. So they might come to the CLAC program at different levels of proficiency, right? So so this program, it's because I'm sure some of our CLAC members are talking about that they are not yet to can-do, but they are on the way to the can-do. So I think that recognizing that part is also important. Absolutely. Yes.
And before we move on, I just want to give a shout out here who helped me with this, Emily Eichel, our LXC program assistant, who is here, by the way. So yes, thank you.
We will have, as we mentioned about some, we will have some case different practices. So that will give us more details about how we actually do that.
Okay, so I've got to do this fast because there's not a lot of time here, and I could talk about this a very long time. Obviously, that would be inappropriate. So here goes. If you have questions, please feel free to contact me. But I have two ways in which my small liberal arts college is employing some of these CLAC ideas. And one of them has to do with a course that my department, we created collectively as a group in the Global Studies department here, Languages and Their Place in the World. And we're looking at how culture manifests in languages, and we introduced linguistics, translation, language acquisition, and language and gender, race, and class, which you can see to offer multiple connections with other disciplines across the entire curriculum. And we did this for a couple different reasons. I mean, one, of course, was we're trying to give students a rationale for why they're studying languages, looking at the foundations, looking at these connections and so forth. But also, we're really trying now to get out of the language ghetto, so to speak, and to promote interdisciplinarity across the entire curriculum at our college. which of course one of the goals of CLAC. I mean, is language and language across the curriculum. But also we have a global diversity requirement. I'm sure many of you have something very similar. And we were trying to find a way for students to meet this. And this particular course was a way we were doing that. And the last part of it, in terms of our goals for creating here, we had, we were looking at new disciplinary and intellectual connections among faculty members. Again, making connections outside of languages, outside even of the humanities. For example, we have an exercise in this course where students go to interview faculty members on campus who have had some kind of international experience. And I can tell you from years of doing this course here that some of the students will do above and beyond what they have to do. They are fascinated by the role that this has played in their professors in biology or in medicine or in other places that they didn't associate with languages at all. So this is one of the goals we had here. And of course, we're trying to increase enrollment in language courses here. But again, we're trying to expand across the curriculum and really demonstrate the relevance of languages here, trying to find different ways. So this course employs a variety of different tools, texts, videos and so forth that explore these connections. And again, whether we're talking about race and gender, for example, in class, and wealth inequality, a lot of things can be brought in here. And the net result at the end of it is that the students really have had a whole series of potential connections, which they then can explore either from their own disciplinary perspectives or by getting involved in a language there. And then the second, though, and the more exciting one here really is the next one. Next slide, please. And it's our Cuba project. And I actually have the originator of the Cuba project here, Dr. Gardner, Stephen Gardner, who started this whole process some years ago. But the idea is that we have a cooperative arrangement with a university in Cuba. It started out as a connection between ORCID researchers at Illinois College and at the University of Pinar del Rio in Cuba. That's where it began. And Dr. Gardner got involved because the biology professor, whose specialty is orchids, didn't speak Spanish, and he wanted to get some students involved in this process. And what has happened is it's ballooned. It's taken off in a way. We now have had 15 faculty members from 7 different academic disciplines are now involved in this program. So we have faculty, we have a music professor who is studying Cuban, a certain kind of Cuban music, and has found, in fact, a research archive with incredible amounts of artifacts as well as material there, which he is using for publications. And the thing is that there are several things that we're trying to do. So one is joint research activities, all right? Obviously, orchids, we started out with that, but the teaching of languages, pedagogy, anthropology, music, sociology. And what we're finding is that the more that we open this up to other faculty, the more faculty want to get involved. They begin to realize that there are potentials here, right? We want to connect the undergraduate students from both nations in these diverse programs, to have them and to have our students encountering students in their area or their field here from this other country. And one of the exciting things about this is that we're developing regular workshops, conferences, and then actually publications that disseminate the joint research that's being done in Cuba and the United States here. And the thing is that this program is a wonderful step forward that internationalizes our campus, it diversifies our curriculum, promotes study of language and culture, and it's a great way to go ahead to make language learning relevant. All the students that are involved in this can see how when they go to Cuba, when they're working with Cuban researchers, for example, the Cuban researchers, many of them have English, but there are barriers. And what's really interesting in the feedback we've gotten when they come back is these students realize that to do the kind of work they now want to do and to explore these potentials, they've got to go back and they've got to do some more work on their language. So they're self-motivated again in this way. So it's a very exciting program. And I think it's one of the things that it was inspired by CLAC principles And and like the course I was talking about and other programs that we have, these are initiatives that started from the ground up. And they won grudging acceptance from our administrators and now becoming a part of our curriculum, a fundamental part of the curriculum. So you don't have to start with lots of money, if you've got imagination, creativity, and a certain amount of stick-to-itiveness, you can do an amazing amount in this regard. And if you have the students behind you, and if you start to get more faculty, this makes it a lot easier to get the resources that you start to need to really carry these programs to the next step. There's more I could say, but I'm going to stop here and see if anybody has any questions. And this slide here is my attempt to render the Cuba project in terms of how CLAC plays a role, played a role in the development and the application of this particular program. We've got language as one influence, and cultural learning, research, and internationalization here. And these are some of the advantages that we've seen that accrue through combining these things together. And the net result then, we bring these different strands together as the Cuba project. But there are lots of things you can see here. Again, we have a problem on our campus with students who are very monocultural in their perspectives or monolingual and are not interested in changing that at all. And no amount of propaganda is going to do that. But when they get abroad in this program, the results are often transformative in this sense. They begin to suddenly realize why this particular ideal that we promoted here at the college is important, right? And of course, this international dissemination of research is also wonderful too, because this allows us to, it's a two-way street. So we're not just simply profiting from Cuba, Cuba's profiting from us as well too. And the program, in fact, one of the difficulties we have is that there's probably more interest than there is money to go ahead and to push this program further. And so I guess that's one of the things you almost in a way might wish for, that the program is the success of the program is generating interest that requires further development of financial resources, as opposed to something that just sort of peters on the vine and disappears there. Anyway, this is just a conceptual diagram that sort of helps you think about how the introduction of CLAC principles, basic principles of CLAC here, and integrating language and cultural learning with research, with biology, with sociology, other disciplines there, how you can create a very creative program that in the end benefits both sides remarkably, and is dynamic and allows us to achieve some of our really important goals as an institution. All right.
Thank you, Bent. So another model that we'll talk about is Binghamton University's languages across the curriculum and global studies. Binghamton University is one of the founding institutional members of the CLAC movement, with its Languages Across the Curriculum, or LXC program, as one of the earliest programs offering purpose-specific language usage, cross-cultural knowledge integration, and intercultural skills development in both curricular and co-curricular offerings. We are actually very fortunate to have with us today the founding director of LXC and Global Studies, H. Stephen Strait, Professor Emeritus of Anthropology and Linguistics, and former Vice Provost for Undergraduate Education and International Affairs. And so our 30 years, which we have just notched this year, has primarily been characterized, and I won't talk about all the 30 years, but it's primarily an infused and empowered model. I see all here is only empowered. But what that meant, or what that means, it was co-curricular study groups, which were sort of connected to these already existing courses. And we offered these study groups to different courses throughout the university, different colleges, right, different disciplines. So it's not just in the arts and humanities, but it was also in the hard sciences and engineering and biology and health and wellness. And those students would participate who had language knowledge and abilities, and who wanted to use that in further exploration of themes and issues with the course that they were taking. So if we connected with a computer science course, and the students wanted to explore issues and topics in computer science with a particular language, they were able to do so through LXC. And that model, because it was 0 credit, it was sort of co-curricular, it really enabled for incredible diversity and many, many different students to participate. It was, in a way, it was difficult logistically to pull that off, but we did, and it was very successful. We've had thousands of students over the years participate. It's been, LXC was a very, it still is a very uniquely popular program. So thousands of students and dozens and scores of faculty from all schools within the university participated in the program. And it empowered. So it's about student empowerment, but not just about the students who participate in it, but in those who actually lead these groups. And more often than not, they were led by graduate students, usually from that particular discipline that we created a study group to, who had that necessary language proficiency. And quite often these were international students who were studying, who were taking, engineering or history or sociology, and who had that language ability to lead these groups. So it empowered both these, and we call them facilitators, language resource specialists, as well as the students who were participating. And we actually, again, through our surveys and through interaction and student work and feedback over the years, even with alumni, it has been, and it's not an understatement to say, a very profound and impactful program. And we've also had a model where we've integrated CLAC, or we've integrated LXC into already existing courses. So not offering this 0 credit extra or co-curricular study group, but how faculty that we've partnered with have infused LXC and CLAC into their own courses already. The other program, and this is a double typo, sorry for that, is the Global Studies minor, and that's an enhancement of traditional study abroad, and it was created to add a further dimension, cross-cultural and linguistic dimension to students while they're abroad, to sort of deepen and broaden their engagement, not just with subjects that they're learning abroad if they're taking courses in Barcelona or Tokyo, but to actually engage in the local environment and in people and history and culture and society and politics and all of the wonderful things that make up society and culture. And it primarily focused on connecting the local, right, that locale to the global, and then making connections back home. And the whole thing about, again, we're bringing it up, the sensitizing and being aware of one's own culture vis-a-vis others as well. And that program grew tremendously. It's actually one of the most popular minors at the university. And if we can go to the next slide. And so I tried to put, also inspired by Bernd's conceptual diagram and schematic, how both these programs, the Global Studies minor and Languages Across the Curriculum, embody globally integrated learning. And we see here how they're empowering, they're in view, and they reflect critical thinking as well as relational thinking. There is that ethnographic mode or intercultural awareness, being aware of difference, of cultural difference, social difference, as well as, being aware of your own background. And then reflexivity, in terms of being conscious about that and thinking about that, not just to identify it, but to engage and to ponder what that means. What that means for yourself and what that means for your engagement, interpersonal as well as academic and philosophical and professional. These are also interdisciplinary programs are multidisciplinary in the sense that, we don't have students from one particular school or major or discipline. We have students from all over. We have business students, we have language students, linguistics and history and anthropology and engineering, and art students, biology students who find these programs useful and relevant because they are useful and relevant. And it also recognizes and it enables students to plug in their biographical experience, their own personal experience into their learning to enhance their learning. And connecting that through real world applications, whether it's projects or research papers, or whether it's in the actual engaging with others as well, whether it's overseas or on campus. And these are also, they reflect, if we look at this together, this globally integrated learning, it's also high impact learning. So it's not about just content, but about process. Recognizing the importance of how we learn and the ways we learn can enhance what we learn. So it's adapting the curriculum to the students. So it's not doing it for the sake of doing it, but it's doing it to be transformational and to have an impact. And we never lose sight of that. Next slide, please, JY. So Binghamton's CLAC programs have embraced change and still do embrace change, and they harness student and institutional interests as well. I referenced earlier one of the challenges in terms of the enrollment decline and the shifts in demography, and how institutions, as we all are aware, they are, it's trickling down in terms of, they're aware of this acute problem, and therefore all administrators and teachers and faculty and practitioners are aware as well. So how can we, as CLAC practitioners, as scholars, as administrators, harness this problem or these other interests, these diverse interests? Well, it's to create something which offers something of value. In our next initiation of languages across the curriculum, we have started a new series of credit-bearing courses, which are no longer co-curricular, but they are sort of connected to a course that we've made inroads or partnership with. And we allow students from that discipline who would like to further use, so it's basically taking that study group model, but now giving it credit bearing, right? Giving it credits, and the students are pleased with this because now they have, if they're actually, spending time and effort, they're actually getting something on their transcript, and the administration is pleased. It gives it a higher profile in terms of, well, it's not this, albeit however wonderful and important and significant, even profound and worthy endeavor, but now there's something that the university can find useful in terms of fulfilling certain degree requirements or credits, in terms of towards satisfying degree requirements. We are also embarking on a round of micro-credentials, which is also tying into institutional interest in terms of attracting students with fewer or declining enrollments. More and more programs and departments are looking, how can we make our X department or discipline more valuable and attractive? How can that lead to or translate or parlay into greater seats and greater students, enrolling in not just in the university, but also in their majors? And micro-credentials are one way to do that. And a CLAC-like program can be fine-tuned to fit this. So it's in a sense, not just gloss, there is a lot of substance there, but it's recognizing that and actually, using that, capitalizing on that, dare I say, that experience. And also because the pandemic has brought to the fore issues in traveling, and it has, especially with international education and study abroad, it has paused or canceled many programs. Well, what do we do with that? Virtual fieldwork, virtual study abroad, online collaboration and exchange. We can still connect with others. We can still engage in meaningful multilingual as well as cultural exploration, but through different modes and different means. It doesn't mean that everything has to stop because of the pandemic. No, we can still actually respond to that and do something very good with that. We just have to be nimble. And as Bernd referenced, that's one of the things, the beauties of this program. It doesn't, and I referenced before the sluggishness of bureaucracy. Sometimes, sometimes we are beholden to the bureaucracy, but sometimes there are spaces for people have innovation or initiative and some ideas to get together on their own to get something started, right? And it doesn't take this whole mammoth, institution to get it off the ground. Sometimes we need that recognition, but oftentimes we can actually start something and give it, breath of life to initiate this. And a lot of these, for example, faculty-led study abroad have been brought up that way. And so this offers a space for those who have the energy, for those who have the initiative and vision to actually do something, especially if you can find a like-minded partner within your university or office or program. And this also opens up spaces to find other ways to internationalize learning without physically traveling. It's also about glocalizing the curriculum. So considering the global in the local, and how it links to and integrates or interacts with and is implicated in the local, in the global, and the global. So for example, with the global in the local, with globalization, how's the world through the flow of goods, info, ideas, people, policy, and processes manifested in a particular place. You can pick any city of the world and we can find how it has been impacted and is touched by other parts of the world and other processes of the world. With the local in the global, how is one locale, whether it's a city or a region, a state or a country, projected and expressed in the world arena. So for example, a state like a nation state or a country like China or the United States in global politics or economics, etc. How is it projected? So it's combining both of those and how they are implicated and interact with each other. Okay, we can segue now. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I want to add one thing because I grow out of the Binghamton Lexi program, and I remember that, for example, I want to go back to Javier's earlier question would be how can we integrate language learning with other disciplines when the other faculty are monolingual. So I remembered one of the semesters I was working with a computer science course, and then the students, they speak different languages. So we did a survey that would be they speak Spanish, Arabic, German, French. So the homework assignments we give to the students that try to find out what the cybersecurity law and cybersecurity cases happening in different countries, and also the published in the news, written in those different languages. It's a very, very eye-opening case for everyone, that because all the students they have no idea what is happening, what are the cases that about cybersecurity in different countries, but then this would help all the students to develop a more culture perspectives about how people approach this, what are the cases, how they set up the law. And so that is using the existing resources that our students have in the classrooms. They learn the language, and by using that, more and more students reported, okay, while I'm researching for the cybersecurity information in Spanish, and I want to know more about, and I want to learn more about in Spanish. I do see a hand raised, Steve. No, you are still mute. Okay.
Yes, it's my hand.
Yeah.
JY, the example you just gave from the computer science course reminded me instantly of two other quite parallel examples to what you gave. about looking at cybersecurity in different parts of the world and seeking out materials in languages produced in other cultures regarding that topic. And the two examples that immediately came to mind to me are the course in international business, in which marketing strategies for goods that were made, of course, in one country had to be dependent upon a localization of their marketing materials to each of the markets in which they were trying to compete. And so that was very eye-opening to the students in the School of Management, to have them realize that, oh, we really need to understand how other cultures deal with these products and these issues. And whatever I end up doing as a business person, I need to remember that. And I maybe need to continue to look for materials in languages other than English that pertain to that. And then an exactly parallel example came, one of the very first courses we ever supported 30 years ago in developing LXC was a course in environmental studies, in which the professor had an existing assignment that he'd been using for quite a number of years, that every student in the class was expected to find materials in the popular media, magazines, newspapers, and so on, pertaining to the issues that were being raised in the environmental studies course. Let's take, for example, global warming. You know, what are the editors in newspapers saying about this, or the letters to editors in the newspaper? And then when we introduced the LXC idea, he instantly recognized that, oh yeah, now I can send them off and find out what the Japanese are saying about it, or what the Germans are saying about it, or whatever, and bring that back to the class, so that in both cases we have much more than an example. And I think it's true for the computer science example. It's not just the students who are doing the LXC assignments that benefit from the presence of LXC or CLAC in the course that they're taking, because the students who are doing those CLAC assignments bring the material back for discussion, and the broadening of the global content of whatever course that LXC program is in. So, end of lecturette.
Thank you, Steve. I also see that in the chat is that, yes, about COIL. For people who are not quite familiar with COIL, it's a collaborative online international learning. So we pair our classes with a university's class in the different countries, and students will work on the projects together. But I want to mention that the COIL would be most courses that they are kind of using English, right? Try to really meet the needs of the most American students that they cannot really speak other languages. So the most of the COIL courses are done in English. So this will be perfect that, and also I do know some of those COIL courses that if we want to develop CLAC in the COIL courses will be for the students, say that if you are working with Colombian University, right, in the COIL projects, and then we can invite our students who can speak Spanish, and they can develop the study groups that talking about the course and in Spanish with that, and they are finding information, finding resources in Spanish, working with the Colombian students and talking with them in Spanish, or bringing to that if they are using German or Arabic and bringing those information in this. So yeah, this will be using the COIL for the language courses. Yeah, so that's, as Zoe mentioned, will be COIL for the language courses. And what we want to do would be that if the COIL for the disciplinary courses, and then we can encourage students in those disciplinary courses to use language to learn the courses, yes. And okay, so I want to go quickly as an idea about education abroad would be, as Bill mentioned a little bit, we want to be more intentional, because I found most of the students, they don't want to go to those host countries learning the language. They probably go to, say that, the university in Spain and taking courses in English. they're wasting this opportunity. So when we are designing those programs, I put here as a wonderful resource from CALA, and I think that we put it in a manual. So you can see that when you are doing that, you can ask the students to remind them how they can develop the language when we are preparing them to before the study abroad experience, even though they don't plan to take any language courses when they are abroad, but they will be in that environment. So give them some more information about how they will learn the culture, how they learn the language in the way, and try to really direct them going through that. Prepare them with some languages. I remember one of them, they talked about ask a student to create some cards and then to develop the language. And you can read more about keep a journal about how they learned the language in that way, even though that they don't really taking the language courses. Reflect, and next step, hopefully many students, when they are learning, they found more, and that's a way we prepare them when they are studying abroad. Through the language, they learn the local culture in a different way, as you just learn that from just an English way. And we will learn more about the CLAC in the study abroad programs. Next Tuesday, we will have more cases sharing that. Here's another model that I'm doing at Stockton. We have the faculty-led programs. And for the faculty-led, they will just go to, say that currently a faculty that will go to South Africa or the Ecuador, and just in environmental studies. Language does not really play any role in that language, in that faculty-led programs. So what we are doing is that every week we'll attach this language and culture discussions with the students. And students, they have the motivation because they want to learn a little bit about local languages and when they are in the country. So these are something that we're developing at Stockton. All the faculty-led programs, we try to attach a CLAC component with that. And so with that, some of those practices or different models we have, and then we will hear more, and we will have we will save more cases, different practices next Tuesday, because for today, well, we're running out of time, and we really want to give you an idea and focusing on what CLAC is, how we see the CLAC, the language should play a role in different programs. And when we are designing the CLAC programs, that we need to map out our resources on campus. Right? Who are the faculty in our language programs? What are the language, how many language programs they are offering? And what are our content courses? I think that it's easier, probably can go with some area studies courses, right? Those courses could be your target courses. Or you can think about how many study abroad programs you have, the international students coming from different countries, how do they use their languages in their classrooms? So designing the CLAC programs to consider existing curriculum, to consider the collaborating with the language department. So that's a very important part. Would be the CLAC is always intersections between the language programs and the other programs. Might be the disciplinary programs, might be international education programs, others. So we should play a role to bring those things together and to develop a creative program. Another part of that is to identify the learning outcomes. And as I remember several of you mentioned that, how would you assess that? What are the things you want to students to achieve? At the end of this, we also want to bring several questions when you are thinking about, okay, how can I do that on my campus? Here are several things to, how can we find the faculty collaboration, right? You will have a language faculty working with another faculty from the disciplinary programs. Even though that sometimes the faculty, they do not with team teaching, they need to, the disciplinary courses should give the opportunity for the CLAC program. So how should we build this faculty reward system? What are the resources? So that if we map for this class, computer sciences, we have 20% of students are international students. Can we use them as a way to develop a CLAC program? For the graduate student training, as Bill mentioned, that for the CLAC programs that at Binghamton, many of those study groups are led by the graduate students. So if you have international graduate students on campus, and if they are in the, say that for the, in the specific disciplines, maybe they can lead a study group for the CLAC program for the undergrads. How to recruit, how to retain the CLAC practitioners. That's another important part. Other than the faculty, how we send the message to the students. If you are using the graduate students to teach or lead, facilitate those CLAC courses, how would you do that? How can we assess students' needs? And what are the, which disciplinary needs they would be interested in having CLAC programs? What's the level of their language proficiency? All those parts we need to consider. I see, Steve, you have a question?
Actually, what I have is a citation. A week ago, the Modern Language Journal published an article on the seal of bilingual literacy that's sweeping the country. State after state has introduced that seal of bilingual literacy as a possible certificate, if you will, that a high school student can graduate with. And the idea that came to mind when I heard of seal of bilingual literacy years ago was that, oh, we should have those at the college level. We should recruit students who have those seals coming out of high school into programs at the college level that maintain the bilingual learning pattern that these students are already well versed in. But to the best of my knowledge, there isn't a single college or university in the country that has done that. I hope I'm wrong. I hope somebody's going to be able to tell me that there are some, but whether there are or not, there should be many.
Yeah, it's really finding the existing resources we have on campus and try to collaborate, try to use those resources. And more hurdles, how can we identify those pedagogical strategies that we can use in the classrooms, right? Especially, I think that some of the questions you have would be, as we discussed a little bit with the metaphysical assessment, virtual exchange, was we talk a little bit about the COIL, how to design a CLAC program for the COIL, how to combine those things together. Bill and Bernd, do you want to share a little bit?
I think, you know, one of the issues that I'm coming up against is there's a kind of an inertia with regard to how our institutions are structured. We all know, I think, the importance of interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary activity, but it takes place within the framework of a rather rigid framework of departments and disciplines, which tend to stand as impediments to this kind of interaction. And again, you might say that in some respects, we do this, we make these, you do team teaching. In my institution, team teaching is done out of the goodness of your heart. There's no reward for it. And the thing is that if you talk to the faculty generally, they're fully aware of how important this is, how fruitful it is, and what could be done. But the problem is that we're kind of constricted by some of these older traditions there. We have not yet, what we're discovering about learning and about student engagement and these things has not trickled down yet to this structure and may never be able to do so. So I think the one thing about CLAC is that it is a bit of a lever, you might say, to kind of pry people out of these comfortable but fixed sort of positions and so forth, and to be experimenting in this regard. And hopefully it's one of these levers that's going to dislodge this rigid structure that most of us have to deal with, and start making real opportunities for the kind of collaboration and multidisciplinary activity that we all know, I think, is vital to the health of our intellectual climate on our universities.
Yeah, considering our time, 3 minutes left. So we are going to, this are something that our next week, we're going to talk about how to apply. If you have some ideas about what you want to develop, and we'll have more hands-on activities next week to talk about how to help you develop a CLAC program on your campus. And the final takeaway is that it's not what you teach, is how you teach, right? Those computer science used to be taught in this way, but now we use language to help students understand more security, cybersecurity issues. COIL in this way, and how we would use language, not just the English, languages other than English, right? It's not just what students know, but what they do. They bring international students, they bring the language to the classroom. How should we use that? Don't waste the resource they bring in. It's not an add-on, it's integrated into all aspects of the curriculum. So for the faculty in the other disciplines, they should not see that, oh, I'm doing actual work. No, this will be that. The goal of the CLAC program will be help students to learn their course, the course content more, rather than just of course, language is one outcome. But for the disciplinary faculty, they see that students, they are more committed to their courses. It changes the current conventional way of teaching and learning. And we want to add language, as what we talked at the very beginning of our vision is, we want universities to recognize language should be recognized as a means to access, generate, and share knowledge. And last minute, we'll have the workshop 2 next Tuesday, same time, and we'll have more cases, and hopefully we'll send you a message later right after this workshop, and hopefully you can share some of your thoughts. You don't need to write along, just say that CLAC for the study abroad, and then we would and also what you want us to talk about for the next Tuesday, and share more information, and we will prepare information to meet your needs. Our contact information here, and still, Vern and Bill, do you want to share something?
In the interest of time, just we hope you all got something out of this, that it was helpful for you in some ways, and it would really, as JY just said, it would help us to be more responsive to you and your needs and your thoughts and your ideas. If you could respond, let us know what you're thinking, what you would like, and we could try to incorporate that into the next workshop, because the whole thing is to reflect all of us and to reflect you. That's why we're here. So thank you.
And I think that the consortium exists to disseminate, it's a resource to disseminate these very creative and innovative practices and so forth, to make it better for all of us here. And that's part of our job, is to try to gather that information. So when you have ideas, and we really appreciate hearing about those, so we can go ahead and begin that process of dissemination.
Yes, we are a group of really people are passionate about this idea. So we will support and really help each other. If you have any questions, just join us and next Tuesday, and we can talk more about this. Yeah, thank you very much, everyone.
It's good to see you all, everyone new, and it's good to see our clackers here and friends. So it's good to see everyone, and we hope everyone's doing well. We look forward to seeing you next week as well.
Yeah. Yes, I'm going to send the recording and the PowerPoints and all the resources to everyone who registered. I do have your emails. Thank you.
Thanks to Amanda again, and Javier and Oscar and everyone who also helped to make this possible.
Give us some real support there.
All right, let me stop sharing.
And Corey too, yes.
So good to see you, Steve. The beautiful weather.
Beautiful.
There's some places that have really nice weather right now, yeah.
Javier. Javier is my colleague at Stockton.
Bye, everyone. Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Vern, if you want to stop recording.
I'm going to stop recording. All right.